Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'll call the meeting to order for the City of Oxnard's Public Works and Transportation Committee meeting. The time is 8:30. Madam Clerk, do you have a comment to read, please?
Member Valenzuela,
Present.
Member Zaragoza,
Present.
Chair Perillo.
Present.
The agenda for this meeting was posted on the City Hall Bulletin Board on March 5th, 2024.
We've had the roll call, the posting of the agenda, and the flag salute. We'll have the flag salute done by our city engineer, Mr. Morgan Kessler, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And we have at least one public comment for items not on the agenda, Mr. Steve Nash. And Madam Clerk, if there's any others, let me know when Mr. Nash is done. Welcome, Mr. Nash.
Thank you, and good evening, Chair Perillo, Mayor Zaragoza, Councilmember Valenzuela, City Manager, staff, and the public. First off, I want to let the public know that I am running for the Division 4 seat on the United Water Conservation District Board of Directors. So with that in mind, I would like to maybe read some information about water that the public may or may not know. From the Ventura County Star, in an average year, 200 million acre-feet of water fall on California as rain or snow. The vast majority of it sinks into the ground or evaporates, but about a third of it finds its way into rivers. Half of that will eventually flow into the Pacific Ocean. That leaves approximately 35 to 40 million acre-feet for human use, with 3/4 being applied to fields and orchards to support the state's agricultural output, and the remaining quarter, 9 to 10 million acre-feet, being used for household, commercial, and industrial purposes. In other words, nearly 39 million Californians wind up using only about 5% of the original precipitation to water the lawns, bathe themselves, operate toilets, and so on. California does indeed have a water supply problem, mostly because its political leaders for decades have failed to expand the state's water infrastructure that had been built during the mid-20th century. Also from the Star, the water level at Lake Piru reached nearly 94% by a week or two ago. Meanwhile, the much larger Lake Casitas in the Ojai Valley is above 90% last I heard. The State Water Resources Control Board adopted regulations on direct potable water reuse, which has some implications for the city of Oxnard and its advanced water purification facility. Unfortunately, we don't have the infrastructure in place to take full advantage of that. United Water reported Fremont diversions of 147,500 acre-feet and a total recharge in the forebay of 135,300 acre-feet, and that's substantial. Again, from the Star, the drought situation across the western U.S. has improved considerably as a result of a very wet winter. In fact, California and Nevada are essentially drought-free at the moment, which is really unusual. Elsewhere, the giant reservoirs of the Colorado River Basin, Lakes Mead and Powell, are now about 1/3 full. United will open the recruitment process to have an individual fill the vacancy of the Division 6 seat currently held by Daniel Nauman, and they're going to decide on that tomorrow. So please, citizens, if you live in that district, in that division, please apply, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nash. I'd just like to say this for the public. There are several members on United Water's board. 4 of them represent parts of the city of Oxnard, Port Hueneme. We've had, as the speakers just announced, we've had 2 resignations just recently. There's been issues in the past. There may be others. residents, the water that you drink is extremely important to you and your family, but also to the city of Oxnard. How it gets replenished into the groundwater, United Water is involved. I hope that some people will consider looking into this opportunity to get on some of these boards. It's
Chair
well worth
Perello.
looking at it.
Chair Perello, there's no additional speakers virtually or in person for this item.
Thank you very much. Moving to the, and thank you, Assistant City Clerk. Moving to the next item, consent. The City Clerk Department, the approval of the minutes for February 27th, 2024. My fellow committee members, do we have any changes, suggestions, corrections?
None.
Do we have a recommendation?
Move the approval.
Second.
Okay, please vote. And we have no comments on this?
Chair Perello, that's correct. No public speakers for this item.
Thank you. Please vote.
Thank you. Motion carries 3-0.
The next item, and ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be a short meeting, but the next item is extremely important. So I hope that the public that's watching and those that will watch this later pay close attention to this item. Reports, D1, Public Works Department, subject, Citywide Pavement Management Program Overview. The recommendation that the Public Works and Transportation Committee provide comments and recommend that the City Council receive and file a report on the Citywide Pavement Management Program Overview. The contact point is Mr. Michael Wolf, our Public Works Director. Do we have any public speakers on this? Apparently we do. Mr. Nash, would you like to wait till after the presentation or before the presentation?
I'll wait, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Chair
Madam Clerk, do
Perello, we do have 2 additional virtual speakers waiting too.
Okay. Okay, there is another speaker? There is another speaker?
Two virtual.
Two, okay. Can you ask them if they would like to wait till after the presentation or speak now? The reason is sometimes the information coming, they may not be aware of it.
Brian Rodriguez, would you like to speak now or after the presentation?
I would like to speak after. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And the second one, please?
Caller with phone number ending in 4076, do you want to speak now or after?
After is fine.
Thank you.
Thank you, speakers. I think it's a wise decision on your part.
You got a speaker now?
So we,
One that wants to speak.
oh, he wants to go now?
No, virtual speakers
They
will
both-
speak after
they
the
both wanna wait.
presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
And
Okay.
council member, I just want to clarify, there's no presentation, just council discussion.
Understand. It was a tremendous, in-depth report, even if it is a limited number of pages. But what it says speaks volumes. It speaks volumes to the residents of Oxnard and the fact that this is 1 week after an election and votes matter and actions taken by voters matter. People can make their own determination which way the actions are. That's my opinion, and I'll stand by it. Do the members have any comments or questions they would like to ask?
I'd just like to make a comment. I really want to thank Morgan Kessler, for the presentation on this item of the PCI. One of the things that struck me that people should know, and I'm not sure if I have a correct number, but we have over $1 billion+ in infrastructure and streets here in the city of Oxnard that we need to take care of. And I think it's important because that's $1 billion is a lot of money on infrastructure. And so the cost to replace that would be about $1 billion. But this year we spend approximately $23 million just to keep up our streets. And of course, one of the things that was mentioned too, well, next year we're going to only have about $6.2 million because of the gas and also some of the Measure O dollars. But one of the reasons that people should understand is that the reason we cannot continue using reducing the amount of dollars that we need to fix our streets is because we're unable to bond, due to the lawsuit that we have by Mr. Aaron Starr, which now, as a result of that, Michael, we're potentially be using general fund money And that general fund money is the monies that we use for the police and fire and so forth. And I think it's really absolutely terrible that we cannot use that bond money because, as was mentioned earlier in one of the commission meetings, it's like trying to buy a house and you want to buy a house cash. And what we, instead of buying a house cash, we go for a mortgage with a down payment. And that down payment is the monies that we have, for the repairs. So I think that, it's important that we understand that Mr. Starr initially asked for 80 PCI. And it just really, it's a brand-new street, we'd have to have $1 billion worth of streets just to get an 80. But currently, we were at 63 a couple of years ago, now we're at 67 PCI. And the city council that wants really a 70 PCI, which is going to take us a couple of years to get there. And my understanding that for 1% of PCI is several $1 million just to get from say 67 to 68. So I think it's really, really important that we understand that and really get a good presentation of the PCI that we have now. And again, we'll have to probably use some gas tax dollars and also some Metro dollars for this coming year of $6.2 million. Sorry for the going all over the page on this thing, but maybe you can probably clarify more what I said.
Just a couple of things that I think I would add to that, Mr. Mayor, is that you're correct. It's the city streets is the largest city asset in terms of value, right? So about almost $1 billion is the present value of that asset. And to maintain that is quite a undertaking in terms of workload and dollars. And so we produce a report every year that does our PCI index. Our draft report for this fiscal year actually shows us going up to a PCI 68. So the draft report is still not finished yet, but the data is in. So the good news is that the council's priorities and investment in paving is paying off by increasing our PCI. And it's true that prior to my arrival, there was presentations to the council about the goals of the PCI of 70. And in that same report that we do every year, it identifies the funding that would be required just to keep the PCI at its current level, which again, in the draft report for this year will be 68. So if we use that number, right now that report says we need about $20 million of hard construction costs just to keep the PCI every year at 68. So with soft cost added into that, meaning design cost, inspection cost, material inspection cost, that number roughly is about $23 million a year that we would need just to keep it at 68. So you can start to extrapolate that in terms of if you want to start increasing that, it's even more, right? Now the money that we put in terms of city CIP projects is not the only way that our streets get the PCI increased. So there are other places or other ways, if you can imagine a development project that gets conditioned to do street improvements because they're putting in new driveways or they're widening or they're putting in new utilities. So we also see a benefit from one of those development projects that then potentially repave those areas immediately adjacent to their property. So we also get some PCI increases based on that. So it's not just our money that goes to that, just our city money, but that's very little compared to what happens with our current funding source. And the other thing that you mentioned was the known funding source for next fiscal year. So we're obviously already working on next fiscal year's budget, next fiscal year's CIP budget. And so we know between our gas tax and what we have identified for Measure O, there's going to be about $6.5 million available for funding of known funding for next year, which falls pretty well short of the $23 million that we'll be asking for to keep our PCI at 68. So I think that was your third point, Mr. Mayor, is that having to find a way to fund that gap or make a decision not to fund that gap is going to be a tough decision for the city council because there's a lot of needs, right? Not a lot of needs across the city, whether it's police, fire, rec services, senior services, things like that. So I think that was your third point.
And I know we're talking about PCI, but for the public, What is PCI?
Oh, I guess I probably should have said that first, huh? Pavement Condition Index. So this would be a scale of 0 being basically a dirt street all the way to 100, which would be a street that's brand new. So PCI of 100, and then we use inspections, visual inspections that will go out, inspect the streets, and they start to mark off different degradations. They may see cracking, they may see rutting, they may see raveling, and so they'll mark off through an inspection process, and then that calculates out to a number. So a PCI again of 100 is a brand new street. PCI of 0 would be a dirt lot, basically, or dirt. And our PCI is at that 68, right at that breaking point. And I've shown this graph before, and it was actually in our presentation here. Right at that breaking point where exponentially the degradation starts to be more exponential than linear. So it's a critical point for us.
And my apologies too, Mr. Chair, because we need to take care of our streets now, because if we don't, that PCI will go down, and instead of costing us X dollars, we can probably triple or quadruple the money that we need to repair it to get it back to 67 or 68.
So in our staff report, we try to talk about the prioritization, and we also talk about the different types of paving methodologies. We have sort of two big buckets, if you will. We have preventative and corrective maintenance. And what you're alluding to, Mr. Mayor, is that corrective maintenance, when the PCI is maybe lower than 50-ish, I'm going to use 50 kind of as the breaking point. When PCIs are lower than 50 or below, you're starting to have to do corrective work, which is much more expensive. So if you can think of a unit area, call it a square foot, call it a square yard, whatever you want to call it, it's 6 to 10 times more to repair that, reconstruct that, than it is to do preventative or corrective maintenance. It's $1 a unit versus $6 a unit.
That's right.
And so the idea here is we want to make sure we are keeping our good streets good. That's a slogan that Morgan brought to me, keep your good streets good. So we talked about this before, especially during the last budget cycle. If we are only doing our worst streets, we'll never catch up, because the paving doesn't degrade in a linear fashion, it degrades in an exponential fashion. So our paving program recommends that a portion of our work should still be preventative work. So it may seem counterintuitive that we're out there crack sealing and slurry sealing a street that looks quote unquote better than the street next to it. Again, the idea is to try to preserve that street so that we're not spending that $6 a unit. 10 years from now, we're spending the $1 a unit now. And so that's that prioritization and that sort of stratification in our staff report that we're trying to address.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, I know as you stated in the staff report and the video, it's prioritized based off average daily traffic, PCI, population density, schools, parks, business, and pothole repairs, etc. I guess my question in regards to this is that because it's broken into 5 phases, and determining how much time passes and the funding we have available for all this, can those phases change or over time as well, depending on weather and other conditions, so forth?
Right, and so we try to make that statement in the staff report that this is obviously a flexible program. It's not rigid. And so the way that we've built this, traditionally the way we would build a payment management program is we would do it by fiscal year, because you can have a pretty decent assumption about how much funding you have available in each one of the fiscal years to do paving. And as the mayor mentioned, the lawsuit doesn't allow us to do bonding, which is a pretty typical process by which cities or municipalities or agencies actually fund projects like this. So now we're trying to decide in the interim, until that legal process is over, instead of doing fiscal years, because that gives sort of a false expectation of when those projects are actually going to get done. Now we're able to adjust smaller or bigger depending on the funding sources that we get. So we can do all of phase 1 or a subset of phase 1 over next year or multiple years. So to your point, yeah, we can be flexible from that standpoint. Our design team will always be ahead, and that's something that Morgan is actually instilling in his team now, is making sure we're prepared with the designs. So once we get the construction money, we're trying to roll right into construction.
And I guess the question is like right now it's $23 million to keep it at the current level for PCI, but I assume like we can expect that number, the $20 million to increase over time because of material costs and labor and so forth, right?
Correct, and I would add to that that if we aren't keeping our PCI at least at 68, it's not only the sort of consumer price indexing or the inflation cost, is that for every time that the PCI lowers, you have to repair more, so it's actually more costly in that fashion. So that's the point of trying to keep the PCI as high as possible, because then you're just deferring more maintenance going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. A couple of questions. You've used the term linear and exponentially. Can you make it, say, more third grade to explain to the public what linear and exponentially is? Because there's a tremendous amount of importance in those terms, and what they mean up here, we're more used to it, but the general public may not.
Yeah, so I guess I would put this in terms that linear is more of a degradation over a longer period of time. Or exponentially, that degradation, that reduction of PCI happens much more quickly. So if you look at it, if you were to graph it, it's either a straight line or a curved line. So linear will be a straight line, and then exponentially will be a curved, where it's starting to really degrade much faster over a period of time than it would be from a linear perspective.
Thank you. I take it to mean something similar along the line of when we see a crack in the street and it can be tar sealed, the crack, versus if we see a pothole and we fill the pothole with asphalt, cold mix asphalt. Over a period of time, that pothole with the cold mix asphalt is going to degrade much faster than the crack that gets some tar in it. And the only reason I say that is because the crack is being addressed much sooner than a pothole would be in, and the underneath belly of the pothole and the underlying foundation is degrading.
So that's the key point there. We're trying to keep as much of the damage to the asphalt in what we would call the top layer or the wearing course layer. Once that damage or once that degradation starts to occur in the structural section below that, it's much more costly to address, right? So when we see half-inch cracking, we see either probably not alligator, transverse cracking or longitudinal cracking, which is typically called block cracking. We can address that with slurry, with a crack sealing and slurry seal. That way it doesn't start to get down into the structural components of that street, right? What we're seeing on top is a very thin surface course, right? The actual meat of that street is below that, right? So we have base, sub-base, and all those things. And so we're trying to keep as much of any sort of superficial damage at that top layer. So your point is that when we start seeing potholes or rutting or things like that, or even some very severe alligator cracking, that typically means that we've gotten into that structural integrity of the road, and now it's going to cost us more to repair.
Thank you for that. I hope that helps the public. On page 10 of the staff report, and I seriously hope the public goes back and takes an opportunity to read the staff report. They're online, they're very good. But the second paragraph on that page, it's described, and I'm asking this question because I get this question. The city of Oxnard, if you drive around right now, you can find various things, curb cuts for ADA compliance at intersections. You'll see pothole repair, the new trucks that we have are out in the cruiser working. There's street repair, alley repair, trimming of trees. There's all kinds of things Public Works is doing. And I've gotten the question, well, when you guys talk about hard construction costs, then you always want to throw in soft construction costs. And in your staff report, we identify the 2023 pavement management report indicates $19.4 million for hard construction costs, which should be spent each fiscal year to maintain the current pavement index. But then it says, when added to the soft cost, which are design, inspection, material, testing, etc., the estimated total amount per year is $23.2 million. What can we tell those people? I know what I can tell them, but what can we tell the people that are going, why don't we just forget the soft costs and just do the hard costs? My answer is you just don't send a bulldozer out to tear up the street and figure that they're going to dump some asphalt on it. It's good. There's planning and there's all kinds of things that are done. And you identified them. And Mr. Kessler, I appreciate the report you did. You've identified them as design, inspection, material testing, et cetera. A little more in depth of what that is.
Sure, if we just sent the bulldozer out there, it wouldn't be $19.4 million. We'd be running into utilities and breaking lines.
Exactly.
Okay, so.
Unintended costs that could eat us alive.
Yeah, that's not the right way of doing business. But there's a fine line in terms of how much money to spend on the engineering design side of the house. I mean, we can go to the extreme end of that, meaning searching for every single utility, what's called potholing, where you search for utilities. You can do that every 10 feet, or you can do that every 100 feet. So there's a fine line of how much money to spend on design versus sort of the sweet spot of what to spend on design. So that first part of that is the engineering team putting together a set of plans that we would give to a contractor or contractors to bid on. So those plans have to be engineered. Our streets serve, and we've seen this, serve as drainage facilities. So we can't just go in there without understanding how we're affecting drainage. We can't go in there and understanding or not understanding where our utilities are. We can't go in there and not meet the requirements of the state in terms of ADA improvements. All those have to be designed. All those have to be put on a piece of paper, designed and signed by an engineer, either myself or Morgan or our design engineer, so that we are protected from any issues related to sort of a liability or a tort claim process. So all that process is the design side of the house. So there's time spent going out there and doing survey work. We have to know if we're going to make a change, are we going to affect the drainage? If we raise up the street if we do an overlay on the street rather than grind and inlay, is that 1 or 2 inch overlay going to affect the drainage? So all that has to be done through a design process. We can't just go out there with a bulldozer and start knocking stuff down. The second part of that soft cost is inspections. And so this is where we make sure what we designed, we actually get constructed. And so we have folks out there that are taking tests. We've got to make sure they're using the right asphalt mix, the one that we dictate for them to use. We don't want to use something that has a high recycled material, or we don't want to use something that's more of an open grade for a rough road. We want to have the right material mix in terms of the asphalt mix. And so we have inspectors out there all the time making sure that we're getting exactly what we are paying for. And so that costs money. It costs money to have people out there doing that inspection. It costs money to have people go do those tests. We got to make sure that the concrete's being used is the right strength of concrete. Those are tests. So all those things cost money to do, so that we ensure that we get exactly what we designed. And so that's the inspection part. The material testing is also a component of that, but obviously we're testing the material specifically, not just the means and method of the contractor. So that again is doing, what's the one for paving? Yes, thank you, the nuclear gauge. I couldn't think of that one. So we have to make sure that the subgrade is prepared to a certain compaction to accept the paving. And so normally that's maybe a 95% relative compaction. So there's somebody out there testing to make sure the contractor has reached that level before they pave. And so this is all to ensure that we get exactly what we've designed so that it can last the longest period of time it can.
And I would like to share this with the public. Before you came on board, there was an issue, and it came to pan out. It wasn't the problem with the contractor. It was the contractor that was the supplier of asphalt to the contractor. They supplied the incorrect material. It was caught, and it had to be corrected. And that's the kind of stuff we do. And the people that are doing these tests, these are not just somebody you just hired off the street. These people have skills, training, and there's specs that they have to meet because, as you mentioned before, the city doesn't want to get sued for something that was done incorrectly.
Yeah, and certifications, most of them have some level of certification. So you can imagine that we want to make sure that the material delivered meets the requirements. So we're pulling weight tickets, we're pulling material tickets, we're validating that whatever came from, let's use Vulcan as the example, whatever came from Vulcan meets our design standards. Somebody's actually physically there pulling the ticket from the driver and matching it up against the specifications that were approved or part of the design. So somebody's actually doing that on a routine basis.
And if I'm correct, I believe that's where our city attorney's office gets involved. If we're not getting what we paid for, they get involved, and we make sure we're compensated, it's addressed, and we do our best to not have it happen to us again. Is that pretty much correct, City Attorney? Okay, she's nodding yes. With respect to, on the very first page of the program, we talked about the software that we use called Street Saver. We also talk about managed by Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the various organizations or criteria to address what quality of pavement index. Are these something specifically peculiar to the city of Oxnard, or are these standards throughout either the county or the state or the nation? How does that work out? So that we know we're not getting something less than what we desire.
Yeah, I'll have
residents desire.
Morgan address that. He's got a lot of knowledge about this, the program that we use.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councilmember Perello. We mentioned Street Saver to begin with, and Street Saver is a proprietary computer application that has been around for quite a while. I mean, I started using it about 20 years ago, and it was pretty mature by that time when I started using it.
You mentioned that 20 years ago, it'd still be considered current state-of-the-art stuff?
Oh, it's very current. It is constantly updated. There is a Street Saver company. The licensing for Street Saver is administered by the San Francisco Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and they kind of handle the distribution. They have the license to distribute the computer application to whichever city, county, or state would like to participate in using the software. We pay a software license every year, and sometimes I've worked for cities where that's paid for with a grant. So there's in certain cases there's no net cost. The Street Saver software is used by cities like San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, the NASA, National Aeronautics and Space Administration uses it for all their pavement needs, as does the U.S. Forest Service. So it's used all over the United States.
Thank you very much for answering that. And to my committee members, the reason I'm asking that question, I'm grateful and appreciative that it was put in the staff report, but the reason I'm asking to go online to come up to the podium, Mr. Kessler, and explain it. We have what I consider computer keyboard gorillas that like to take on the city of Oxnard and make all kinds of comments. And they don't read the staff report, but they take off after the city of Oxnard. I appreciate your explanation of what that is. We're not running a third world country here in the city of Oxnard. Thank you. And no degradation to any third world country, but I need to say that. And I have speakers, but I'd like to get this before the speakers come on. I'm grateful, extremely grateful, that there's part of the staff report has to do with the lawsuits filed by Mr. Starr and his corporation. A lot of people think when they see the headline, "Moving Oxnard Forward," that it's for the best of Oxnard. My opinion, it's for the worst of Oxnard. But that's the name of the corporation. And Mr. Starr's corporation has been involved in lawsuits. He has won some, he's lost some. But with the current issue, he lost and he's appealed it. And as the staff report indicates, the appeal process could take a year for the case to be briefed and argued and for the court to issue a ruling. As much planning and street paving work must be modified until such time the lawsuit process is completed. Now, if we could have the city attorney address, if there's an initial lawsuit and a person loses, what are the stages that they get to before there is a final do not pass go anymore?
So after they lose at the Superior Court level, they can, once they lose at the Superior Court level, they then have the right to file an appeal with the appellate court. So they'll initially file a notice of appeal. It will be set for a briefing schedule. They'll have a briefing schedule, and then it may be set for oral argument, or an oral argument will not be requested, and then we just wait for the appellate court to issue a decision. Once that decision is issued, say Aaron Starr's corporation could then seek a reconsideration at the appellate level of that appellate court decision, and if that is upheld, he could then seek review at the California Supreme Court. So
So-
it could be a lengthy process.
So the staff report indicates it could take another year to get to the appellate courts. Can I assume that it could take another year, possibly more, if he decides to appeal, which has been his standard operating procedure, further down the road?
Yeah, if he seeks to exhaust all of his appeals, it could take longer. Typically, things in this district take maybe about 18 to 24 months at the appellate level to resolve.
Thank you for the clarification. I hope the residents heard that. Again, everybody has a right, and we're fortunate to live in the country. You can file a lawsuit, you can hire an attorney if you believe in your cause. But on this particular one, in my opinion, this is hurting our city. And that's, I believe, said enough on that. Madam Clerk, we'll start with whoever wants to go first on the public comment.
Is Steve on it?
Chair Perrello, do you want to take Steve Nash
Okay.
first?
Thank you, and good evening once again. So I got two takeaways from the staff report, and they were touched upon by both Chair Perrello and staff. The first is that pavement does not degrade on at a linear level, degrades at an exponential level. So very simply, what cost $1 this year will cost $10 next year if we're talking about an exponential growth rate. The second item I got was if we have to spend $23 million a year to keep our PCI at a current level with maybe a slight increase, we only are able to spend $6 million from Measure O and from the gas tax. So that leaves a deficit of $17 million. And again, that will not be a linear increase from year to year. So if we're looking at a $17 million deficit this year, what will it be next year? Will it be 34 million? Will it be less? Will it be more? So you never want to have your assets diminished in such a crazy, insane way that Mr. Starr has forced the city into. So I do agree with Chair Perrello's comments in this matter. And it's my perception that perhaps the City Council and the staff have not presented this issue to the public in such a way, well, in all of the ways available, whether it's social media, whatever. I'm fairly active on social media, and I just don't see this being talked about or presented. So I hope that when the City Council members go to neighborhood council meetings, that they absolutely bring this issue up and explain it to the public, because I don't think the public understands what's at stake with the degradation of our road infrastructure. And I mean, I was happy when I go to Ventura. Their roads are horrible, and I thought Oxnard was doing a lot better. But this puts us back into a situation where our roads will suffer because of political shenanigans. So anyway, thank you for your time and good evening.
Thank you. Thank you. The next speaker.
Chair Perrello, the next virtual speaker is caller with phone number ending in 4076. Please press *6 to unmute and introduce yourself if you like, and you have 3 minutes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good evening, committee chair, committee members, city staff. This is Ray Blatel. Thank you for your time. According to the Measure M briefing, $23.3 million will be used, is allocated to maintain the current PCI level. Of this, $6.25 million will come from Measure O and the remainder from the gas tax monies. My question is, the city is receiving some $50 million annually from Measure E tax money. Measure E tax money is commingled with the general fund. That being said, why can't the city shake some of the Measure E money loose to help fix the streets? After all, when you guys campaigned and promoted Measure E on the ballot, didn't you say it could be used for streets? Look at your old Measure E campaign slides and you'll see that. Also, years ago, probably 2 or 3 years ago now, the city was going to resurface Gonzalez Road. I remember this. Your former city engineer, Tanya, I'm butchering her name and I really apologize to her spirit, told me that they were waiting for delivery of some video detection system to support traffic control. Surely this detection system has been received, delivered already, but has it been installed in Gonzalez route? I don't know. If it has, is it being used as intended? I can't help but wonder. As a matter of fact, Measure O money has been allocated to the intelligent traffic system for years to develop some promised real-time traffic management system based on real-time traffic conditions. Obviously, this has never been implemented since the traffic management in Oxnard is non-existent. I see green light indications at intersections where there are no cars waiting to turn. Is this what ITS calls efficient traffic management? I think not. The result is in cross traffic just waiting for nothing. There's no cars there. It's not very efficient. So when is ITS going to produce something useful? Now's the time to do it. Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Chair Perello, the next speaker is Brian Rodriguez. Brian, please unmute yourself and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the committee and city staff and members of the public. My name is Brian Rodriguez. I'm a citizen and resident of the city of Oxnard. I just kind of wanted to touch on 2 points that I hope maybe city staff could also address. And those are just of equity and safety. When it comes to equity, I didn't really see anything in the report that kind of addressed when streets are being repaved, whether or not it's done in an equal fashion with regards to throughout the city. I know when trees are being trimmed, I think that was divided into 3 sections within the city. So I'm kind of curious if when streets are paved, if that's similar, if there's a similar system to ensure that one part of the city isn't getting more paving done than a different part of the city. So I don't know if Director Wolf could kind of address that. And then the second thing was with regard to safety. I know the previous speaker had mentioned Gonzalez Road, and I think that's a perfect example of where a bike lane, both bike lanes on, both sides of Gonzalez were removed to help make space to repave that street. And so I was curious what the practices are for ensuring that, cyclists are safe in those sections, whether or not there's been increased signage or temporary sharrows being put on the street, on the road, and just what are the practices? And then when the street is repaved, is there a practice to kind of do more safety enhancements with regard to maybe adding crosswalks or kind of adding buffers to bike lanes and what that looks like? And I also did just want to welcome the new city engineer, Tatiana Arnaud. The previous city engineer was absolutely fantastic, and I think her departure is, definitely a loss for the city. And so the new city engineer definitely has big shoes to fill, but, I definitely welcome him to the city and can't wait to see, projects move forward now because of his great work. So thank you.
Madam Clerk, is there any other speakers?
Chair Perello, there's no additional speakers virtually or in person for this item.
We could possibly have staff address some of the questions, but I would just like to clarify a point. City Engineer Tatiana Arnaud was good, but she left of her own free will. She left of her own free will. Just want to make that clear. We have a terrific individual serving as our city engineer, Mr. Morgan Kessler, right now. Thank you for being here.
So, Councilmember, I'll address the Measure E question first, and then I'll hand it off to Director Wolf. So, first of all, Measure E is not commingled with the general fund. Measure E is general fund.
Can you repeat that? Explain that, please.
Yes, Measure E is not commingled with the general fund because Measure E is general fund tax revenue. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, we are using general fund dollars to finance a lot of this road work currently, and we're going to be proposing doing so again next year. The issue at hand is we're using more of that than we should have to due to this dam litigation. So this idea that the Measure E portion of the general fund is somehow this extra money that we have, that's a fallacy. The whole purpose for Measure E was to get us the revenue that this city, a city of this size with all of our needs, it's to make up what we needed. Measure E was never intended to be extra cash, and it is not extra money. It's money the city needed. So in the balance, and as we go forth with this item at the council, and as we discuss the upcoming budget, we will, to Mr. Nash's point, we will be addressing this more and more publicly. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any?
Yeah, I'll add a couple of things. There's one of the comments that's not specific to paving, so the city attorney probably won't want me to talk about that one. So I will not talk about ITS. But the other comments was about how do we select different areas for paving, and there was a question about equity. As outlined in the staff report, we do put a weighted value on PCI. We put a weighted value on how many times we're out there doing pothole repair. And so that dictates a lot about where we're recommending. Now, the question about equity, I've actually looked into this several times because it's been asked many, many times. And right now, and I think it's kind of always been unfortunately, a discussion about the north part of Oxnard and the south part of Oxnard. I went back, I think, six years worth of paving, and the amount of funding spent on the north side of the city and south side of the city for paving is about the same. Every time we do projects, obviously one may go in front of the other one, depending on the location of the paving. But I can't find any evidence that there's a priority over one location than the other. We really are looking at it from a technical standpoint, more so than a political standpoint. I mean, obviously that's not our position from a staff perspective. But the question is actually an interesting comment about the prioritization, and I didn't talk a lot about that. I think Councilmember Valenzuela mentioned it, the prioritization that we list in the staff report, which is important. Looking at our prioritization, PCI is a pretty heavy component of that. But we want to recognize that we're not, again, staff's recommendation, we're not suggesting that we do the worst streets only. So there'll be a effort by which a percentage of our improvements will be preventative improvements versus corrective improvements. So PCI plays a factor in that, but it's got to be a higher PCI, not a lower PCI in that discussion. But PCI as its essence is a big driver about where we're recommending. We included the maps as attachments to the staff report to show where exactly, Councilmember Perrella is showing it, exactly where we're recommending it based on those prioritizations. One of the big items I've asked since I've been here to address is where are we spending a majority of our time doing pothole repair? And I'll explain that a little bit more. Pothole repair is a temporary process. Whether you use cold patch or hot patch, it's still a temporary process. It's never meant to be a long-term repair. So if we're constantly out at locations spending high dollar amounts for little return, meaning high dollar amounts for temporary repairs, that street segment should start rising to the top of the list of paving. Because then we can have that same team who actually does concrete repair or curb gutter repair or sidewalk repair, we can have them go do other things. And so the idea here is try to utilize our GIS system and our identification of where are we spending a lot of our time doing pothole repair so that we can actually come and actually pave that street so we don't have to continue to do those temporary repairs. So that's another key weighted value when we start to prioritize. And then, as Councilmember Valenzuela mentioned, we want to look at, are there utilities there that we're going to be replacing anytime soon? Because we don't want to be paving a street and then cutting it back open. That's not a good place for us to be. Now, sometimes that happens from an emergency standpoint, but we don't want to plan for that. And so those are some of the ways that we prioritize. And so we start seeing these locations throughout the city come up. And you can imagine that some of that's also a function of how old the street is, how it was originally constructed. If it was originally constructed as 4 inches of asphalt over native, that street is under-designed, right? Versus a street that was designed for a thicker structural section, maybe a newer street. And so those also come into play, like how was the original street designed? And that tells us, gives us an idea of how often we're going to have to go back out there and repair it. And so I think the question is about, do we sit down and think equity? You know, as an engineer, that's not our process, right? We sit down and think data. We want this to be a data-driven process. Now, the council obviously will have input about the locations. We are going to present sort of data-driven process. And so that's part of that. The second part of that comment, which I liked from the last speaker, was about the enhancements. So he asked a very good question about the temporary situation that's going on in Gonzales. So from a safety perspective, we want to raise the medians back up to their normal level in terms of the distance away from the top of the paving. That provides a safety buffer. A raised median obviously provides lots of safety-related benefits. Over time, when you start to pave, do overlays, that curb starts to narrow down, right? You've seen that. So the first thing that we're doing out there is resetting the median curbs. And so to do that, we needed enough space for the contractor to work, which meant we needed to move the traffic over. And so the question is about how are we addressing the cyclists in the interim, and we do have signage out there that talks about either the bike lane being closed, or we also have some share the road signs out there. So again, it's a temporary situation, but we are addressing it with signage. The second part of that comment or question was about what is going to happen after the fact. So the bike lanes are going to go back in there, and the question about what kind of potential improvements. So we'll have ladder crosswalks versus the old traditional crosswalks. We'll do ladder crosswalks. We'll do curb ramp improvements, meaning ADA improvements. So we have a lot of those safety improvements that are built into the Gonzales project that'll enhance the pedestrian and cyclist use of that Gonzales corridor. I think that was the second part of his question.
Mm-hmm. Do you appreciate that very much? And for those that take the time to look at the staff report, with respect to the question, if we're cherry picking certain parts of the city, these projects are throughout the city, throughout every council member's district. I look at it, I don't see any area benefiting at the expense of any other area. I'm grateful for the explanation we've had. One other question, Mr. Blattell made comment about the traffic intelligence thing. Is there anything you could bring up to speed in that? I know it's not on the agenda, but the city attorney, can you?
I don't think,
Yeah, that would exceed the scope of this item.
it's not part of it.
So it's not,
It's not. No.
okay, so the city attorney says not at this time. Okay,
I'll just say there's a misnomer, there's a misunderstanding of what ITS means. Everybody thinks ITS means signalized corridors and that they'll be able to get through corridors faster. I'll say that's not what ITS, I would strongly suggest they look at the FHWA website or Caltrans's website. There's a long list of what ITS really is.
okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
And I will share with all the public speakers and the public. This morning, I was at the intersection of Vineyard Avenue and Oxnard Boulevard. Light turns green, 3 cars, not side by side, one after another, come through red. This evening, we have 2 guys on bicycles running the opposite way, electric bicycles, against the traffic, and they just look and they kind of put their hand up like, I'm coming through. The responsibility and the safety always goes with the rider. There are laws, but if people don't follow the laws, there's repercussions, sometimes tragic. I just want to say that. Do the council have any other questions?
Yeah,
And this
Mr.
has been
Chair.
Good presentation.
Yeah, by the way, that's what I wanted to say. Excellent presentation, and Mr. Kessler and Michael. But one of the things that I think that we're doing now with the citywide pavement management program is take care of deferred maintenance. Deferred maintenance because for many, many years, we didn't ever take care of our facilities, our parks, our mediums, and so forth. But now we're starting with a program that's eventually it's gonna save us a lot of money in the long run, because at PCI, as you mentioned, once it goes down a point or two, then it's gonna cost us 10 times what it normally would cost us to take care of it now. It's the same way we put in a roof on a building or painting it and so forth. Kind of saving the deferred maintenance, because if you don't paint a building after a while, not only do you have to paint it, then you have to change the facade or the stucco and so forth. So this is exactly what we're doing now with the citywide pavement management, is taking care of the potential deferred maintenance in the future. That's going to save us some money. And not only that, it's going to save a lot of automobile damage and so forth to our residents, which I think is extremely important. I thank you for the good work that you're doing. And of course, like I always said, we're always going to have 98% of the people that are happy, and 2%, regardless of what we do, will never be happy. So, but thank you again. Excellent presentation.
I just want to say move to file and receive this report for the council.
You need a second?
It's just we receive and file, isn't it?
And also to send
Yes.
it to the council.
Yeah,
With the Senate council.
Send it to city council.
I'll make the second, but I'd like to make a comment. The comments that my committee members have made with respect to you gotta maintain what you've got. It makes no difference if it's a car or your body. I'll give two extreme examples. The doctor tells you got something wrong inside of you and you need to come and take a visit. Well, the guy doesn't want to go, or the lady doesn't want to go till they get their hair done, or they get a new suit, and then they show up and it's too late. We can't let our streets get in that thing. The car's not running right, but the Landau top or the paint job's not looking good, so you want to get a paint job. Meanwhile, the wheels fall off. You can't do that. And the other aspect, individuals have successfully tied the hands of the city of Oxnard legally, but in my opinion, I've expressed it already. But I would like to remind people, how many of you bought a house with cash? How many of you bought a car with cash? How many of you, if something really goes wrong in your family and somebody needs a surgery, you have a piggy bank with enough money to take care of everything? People, organizations, cities, states, nations, they use a bonding process. You borrow the money. If you're responsible, they give you the credit. They'll loan you the money, you pay it back. These citizens, the organization, again, moving Oxnard forward, and Mr. Starr have done a tremendous disservice, in my opinion, to the city and crippled the city in the ability to move forward. The maintenance that the city manager, this mayor addressed, Mr. Starr was involved, along with a member of the audience, Mr. Nash, who's currently serves on our planning commission. Tremendous work for volunteer for the city of Oxnard. But Mr. Starr was involved when the discussions initially started about the sewer plant and how bad the sewer plant was and how far it had been able to go downhill. I may be getting a little bit off, city attorney, but these things, they don't go away. The streets are not going away and the lawsuits are not going away. And unfortunately, we can't snap our fingers and make things right. But I will second the motion and please go ahead, unless there's any more comments. None?
Madam Clerk.
Okay, please go
We
ahead.
do not have any additional speakers for this item, Chair Perrello.
Thank you very much.
Chair Perrello, I have a motion by Member Valenzuela, a second by Chair Perrello. Motion carries 3-0. Thank you.
Thank you. We did have a question of something about the traffic thing from Mr. Littell, and maybe we could possibly put it for a little update in some future Public Works committee. That's the only suggestion I have for a future council.
No,
No?
none.
With that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending. The meeting's closed. What?